Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Ruben Fukan. So, this is the podcast, Get the Gist, where we talk to industry leaders to understand how they are looking at newer technologies in improving their workflows, and how do they overcome the challenges that their industry is facing in terms of technology adoption and operational efficiency. So, my company, GoodGist, we provide AI executive assistance for professionals and team to help automate administrative tasks like email triage, document processing, meeting scheduling, and a lot of things that typically waste professionals' time. So, when I talk to leaders in the industry, I try to understand how they are incorporating it both at an individual level as well as at their organizational level. So today we have an incredible guest with us, Dennis Walker, who is VP of Operations at a small financial organization based out of Boston. He has deep expertise in banking operations, strategy, and risk management. And Dennis has been at the forefront of driving transformation in financial institutions. He excels at aligning organizational objectives and optimizing processes to drive measurable growth. Dennis, welcome to the show and really excited to have you today.
Yeah, thanks. Welcome aboard. I'm excited to talk more about it.
Great. So let's start with where you are based out of, which is Greater Boston. And typically, people say that the environment where you are that kind of influences a lot of your thought process and how you apply that at both personal and professional level. So, and Boston being a home of rich history, as well as cutting edge innovation that is happening there, right? It has a very vibrant technology and startup culture. So, how has this environment influenced the way that you think of financial services and technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. Boston, as you know, has a pretty deep history, and it's a financial services, right outside of New York. So a lot of institutions have been around since the late 1800s. So a lot of competition, and I think it's been really competitive and interesting to kind of see how all those institutions have meshed together and really adopted that innovation mindset over the last 15 years, and kind of incorporating AI into a lot of that back office customer experience perspective. We continue to do that. It continues to evolve, and we continue to watch it.
That's great. So let's start with your journey, right? So, what has your professional journey been? And I know that you are exploring a lot of the newer technologies, both at a personal level and at a professional level. So, would love to hear what your professional journey has been like.
Yeah, I like to describe my the first half of my career as like a recovering auditor. So I spent the first half of my career mostly in governance, risk, compliance. Then I moved over, got a chance to kind of move to the dark side, as the auditors say, to the front office, where I kind of went into operations, and I've loved it ever since. I really like being at the forefront of the voice of the customer experience, and kind of a little different from strategy. It's more like strategy executions, right? Taking those ideas and projects and really supporting the customer and rolling things out to the customer. I really love that. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5, 10 years, and hope to continue to do that.
That's great. And I think the customer experience is paramount for the industry that you are in. So, let's talk about the industry in general, right? So I've seen recent reports that indicates that major US banks, including like Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, right, they have closed around 145 branches in a short span of time. And so, talking about customer experience, so what, in your opinion, does that impact the customer experience? And what is your trend? What is your take on this trend?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hybrid role. I think for them, they're so big that it's probably not going to impact them too much. But for smaller institutions, which is the remaining 5, 10,000 credit unions and small banks, I think for them, it's going to be that continued hybrid experience. The traditional branch, there's not a huge line out the door anymore. I think the role of the branch is transforming into more of a problem solver role where, you can kind of also embed like what we do at my current organization where I own customer service, but as a backup, we have the branches helping out with customer service and helping out they're almost an extensions of the back office team now to help solve customer problems. And so, when you think about a support perspective, having the right access, having the right software, the training, all that same knowledge that you'd expect, and there was, that kind of front office, back office divergence, it's really not. It's progressed into more of like a hybrid sort of, I would say, trend now where everyone needs to know everything in order to support the customer from a smaller institution perspective. And that's where I kind of see it. At the same time, too, I mean, if you think about it from like a smaller institution perspective, if someone from North Dakota was trying to open up or get into the Massachusetts market, they don't have the brand awareness. So that traditional footprint still tends to be a part of that strategy, just combining the more digital advertising and approach to spreading that brand awareness. So I still think there's a hybrid role to play with it.
That's very interesting. In fact, it's great that you mentioned that, because there is a increasing discussion about whether digital banking will fully replace in-person services, right? That banking won't be where you actually go and visit a branch, right? Everything happens online. So do you see that as a trend happening, if not immediately, maybe like 5-10 years down the line? Or do you think that it'll still continue to be a hybrid because you need that touch and feel experience?
Yeah, I think down the line, I think it's possible. I still think in the next 5, 10, or 15 years, with the populations that we have in the Northeast, I still think it makes sense to have that touch point. I mean, I still call some of the big banks for some of my different products that I have, and waiting on the phone for a half an hour or 45 minutes is not the funnest thing. So when you have that smaller competitive advantage where you can just walk into a branch or pick up the phone because you have enough staff to pick up the phone, it really does provide that competitive advantage. And I still think even if everything's replaced with machine learning and AI, you're still selling to humans, right? So you still kind of have to have that personal touch.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, in fact, talking about AI, right? So, AI, one of the biggest area that AI is making huge strides, right, is in basically banking. And there are a lot of use cases, right, from customer support automation to like
Mhm.
fraud detection and hyper personalized financial services. So, how do you see AI reshaping the customer experience and operational efficiency in banking?
Yeah, if I can steal some quotes from some of your past podcast members, it's that quicker, faster, and more reliable concept. I tend to be a glass half full person when it comes to AI, although I do, from a broader perspective, think there needs to be guardrails. I think that someone who's embracing that new technology is going to be much better off. I mean, I love to use ChatGPT for just basic things that, writing something, give me some ideas or some feedback on A, B, and C. And it helps catalyze things quicker and more efficiently. So, do I think it's going to replace them? Yeah, I think naturally new technology will replace some jobs and things like that. But I think it's just going to make the people that you have much more productive, efficient, which ultimately transfers to the customer and a more happy customer, right?
Yeah. So with technologies like AI, right? So as they're getting more ingrained into customer support,
Hmm.
having access to financial data of customers, right? So there is also the worry about risk and privacy
Yes.
challenges and all of those, right? So how do you see the industry mitigating those challenges, and what are some of the best practices that you have seen while implementing these newer technologies?
Yeah, I think it's always just comes down to like who are you partnering with and what's the trust and their public image, right? I think I love the concept of embedding AI in all of the different customer interactions. It makes things much quicker. What's my balance? Can I make this transfer? And you could do that instantly, right, with some of the newer technologies. But one of the things I think is the cornerstone of financial services, especially banks and credit unions, is the trust that they have. And so you really need to figure out who your partners are going to be and make sure that security is at the forefront of that. And we do that from various things like, reviewing Ks, reviewing public data. We review third-party vendor management is a big part of a financial institution, and who you partner with is super important.
That's great. So on that note, right? So which are some of the, I would say, the potential use cases, right? Or kind of like a no-brainer kind of a use cases of using AI in the financial domain, right? So what are some of the areas that you see that AI can deliver the fastest ROI in
Yeah.
this domain?
Yeah, I think the fastest one I think is on the customer experience and interaction, on specifically customer service, right? I'll give you an example of AI that I had. I won't name the bank, but I had called up. I missed a credit card payment by a couple of days, and I called up and I knew I was going to be on hold for a while. But the first thing that popped up when before they even talked about, I got to talk to a customer was, "Are you calling about a late charge that was just caught? That was just charged?" And somehow it already knew that it was probably related to that, from a probability perspective. And right there is like, do you want it reimbursed as a one-time courtesy? So I didn't have to talk to anybody. It got reimbursed right away as a one-time courtesy without even, within 5 minutes. And, if I wanted to continue to wait on hold, I'm sure I would have been on hold for a half an hour, 45 minutes to do the same thing. But from an AI perspective, that was pretty cool. And so I
I
kind of
agree.
see things like that happening. I think one of the struggles for smaller institutions is you can only innovate as fast as some of your core providers and partners, whereas the larger banks kind of have those embedded technology and R&D within the institution. But I think our partners do a great job of trying to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really amazing use case, right? And it shows how, I mean, relatively simple looking user experience can make a whole lot of difference. So thanks for sharing that story. So let's talk about embedded finance, right? So integrating banking into like non-banking platforms is a rising trend. So how do you think that this will impact the traditional role of banks, and do you see more collaboration or competition ahead?
I think it's going to be collaboration. I think the one caution is branding, right? And that's what comes to mind with the embedded finance. I think it's a good revenue source if you know if you have the infrastructure and you have the technology ready to go. But branding comes to mind. Again, another personal experience is we had to redo a bay window, which wasn't, for the average person, a pretty good size and chunk of money. The construction team came out and were like, "Hey, we have a finance team ready to go." And it was a company that I had never heard of before. And it was good terms. But when I had to research the company, I was like, I've never heard of this company, but it was a subsidiary of one of the larger institutions that I had never heard of. It worked for us. But would I open a checking account and savings account with them? Not really. Again, it's back to that trust and reliability perspective. A small loan like that, perfect, let's do it. As opposed to waiting and going into a branch and the major stuff you still have to kind of to do and go into a branch and talk to someone. But for an embedded finance, for them it works. Cross-selling might be difficult, but I think that brand piece is still the concern. But if you have the technology, I think it's going to be more about partnering than it will be competition.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, talking about the financial domain, right? So, regulations is one of the biggest thing. It's a heavily regulated industry, and regulatory bodies are evolving. I mean, for example, UK is consolidating its payment systems regulator. So do you see similar shifts happening in US, and how do this regulatory changes impact financial institutions at scale?
Yeah, I think without trying to get political, I think it does kind of depend on who's in government and who has the majority. I think right now we'll probably start to see some changes, but I think they're welcome changes. We have think of how many different regulatory bodies there are in the U.S. that a bank gets reviewed by. I mean, I was at over a 75 top 25 bank before, and I managed the regulatory remediation process for internal audit there. And I think I dealt with the FDIC, several state regulators, OCC, and really, it's like why? I think there's necessary. I think they're necessary. I think they really do help with the end consumer, but from a consistency of implementation and interpretation of the rules, I think it would benefit in the long run. I think we will see that.
That's great. And continuing on that point of regulations, right? So when it comes to newer technologies like AI, and of course with the associated risk around cybersecurity and other privacy related things, right? So do you see, because at this point regulators are still trying to figure out what are the right kind of regulations to put around AI, because it's all new and it's happening so fast. So do you see very strict regulations emerge in the future around AI, and will regulation impact the adoption of newer technology?
I would say yes to that. But I think if you kind of look back at history, anytime something's new, the laws and regulations, they evolve over time, right? More reactive than they are proactive. And I think that's what you'll have here, over time. If you look at banking in general, all the different, they call them the alphabet soup of regulations, those evolved over time. And I think it'll be the same thing with AI. I think it's pretty cool right now that we're kind of more in an experimental stage with AI, and people are rushing to get things done. But I think just in that area too, there'll be consolidation. The market will mature. There'll be a fewer big players, but for now, it's pretty cool to kind of see what it can do. But I think regulation will catch up, and there'll be guardrails.
Yeah, absolutely. So economic uncertainty is like becoming the theme of modern times, right? With so much going around the world, right? And shifting interest rates, and I mean, major banks are forced to revise their earnings forecast, right? So how do you see the industry, and of course your organization and everybody else navigating these challenges, and what are the some of the strategies that are helping maintain the stability, right, with so much of uncertainty around things?
Yeah, I kind of like to think back to Jamie Dimon's comment about that fortress balance sheet, where you know what you want to do, you know what you want to spend, and you have kind of a diverse balance sheet of revenue sources to kind of help with that. Now, that's a little bit more challenging for smaller institutions, but I think really what it comes down to, even if you're at the smaller level, is where do we want to spend our money? Why do we want to spend it? And it should be how are we helping the customer solve? I think if you focus on those three, which is what we've been trying to do as well, and I can give you a quick example. And for our size bank, it's excuse me, credit union, it's a big deal. We just changed and upgraded our phone system. It was an enormous change that was welcome and needed. And I know it sounds really small and inconsequential, but it wasn't for us. Now we know who's calling and when. We know, what do you call it? We can gain lots of insights and data and reports. And now our next pivot is to understand why they're calling, right? And so that's our maturity. That might differ for a larger institution and what their roadmap looks like. But I think it's knowing what you need to do and why, and then making sure that you're smart with where you spend your money. And I think if you do that from a conservative perspective, those are the institutions that will survive.
So like you have mentioned, that there's a lot of technology transformation that banks are going through, right? Even things that may seem small is actually very important from data perspective, right? And that brings to the topic of digital transformation, right? So which has been a mainstream topic across financial institutions for quite some time. So, can you share some insights from your experience on the digital transformation journey that you have seen, right? What works well and what is still a challenge in the digital transformation?
Yeah, I'd say the proprietary data and really harnessing what that data can do from like an insights perspective. You can create as many crazy amount of reports that you want, but finding something that's insightful and useful that's going to add value to the customer is hard. You can really backlog your data team from an operational perspective, from a sales perspective. So it's really understanding what you want from like a market niche or a market penetration perspective, depending on where you're going, to really align that data and insights role to something that's going to add value. And so that's still a hard thing to execute, but I think investing in that is key for digital transformation. You got to know what your data can do. You have to know your data, and you have to turn that data from insights like into cash, right? Like next best product, understanding what your customer wants, where they are in their buying journey, what they're looking for. And I think people and companies that get that right are going to be the ones that stand.
Yeah. So, what part of in your organization does data-driven decision making play a role when it comes to dealing with customers and their requirements, right? I mean, vis-a-vis, is it like a lot of decisions are being made by professionals based on their understanding of customers, or is a significant part of the decision done through data driven systems?
Right now, for us, we're smaller. So I think it still tends to be we take that voice of the customer upwards and turn on that into products, services, and decisions. We don't have a proprietary data lake or things like that just yet. I think that's on our roadmap, and we're working with our core providers, but we're not there just yet, which is okay. I think that's for our size institution, that roadmap is appropriate. But if you're the top five, institutions in the country, they should be already down that roadmap, right? Like that should be implemented, adjusted, pushed out to the mobile app, online, all that kind of stuff. And so we're kind of starting that journey now.
That's great to hear. So I think you have touched upon this briefly, but I still wanted to revisit this topic because it's so crucial from customers' perspective, which is basically with the increasing reliance on like data and technology, right? You have mentioned about customer trust is more critical than ever, and customers having that faith that their data, their records are safe with all of the digital transformation that is happening, integration with newer technologies that is happening. So, what are some of the key measures that you think financial institutions are already taking or should take to ensure the security and transparency and to convey that trust to the user, right? Rather than saying that trust us, right? But versus the demonstration of trust to the customers.
Yeah, I think it comes down to where you put your money, right? I think it's security, investing in security infrastructure, from an audit perspective, pen tests, things like that, to make sure that you're constantly testing your infrastructure. I think it's also awareness, even on the operating side of employees, right? It's training employees to recognize anomalies. I can't tell you how many times that my team, where I'm at right now, we've had attempted synthetic ID, and my team did an amazing job in saying, "Hey, this isn't this customer. They call all the time. What's going on?" and help thwart that. I think it still comes down to a people thing, but I think partnering with the right technology firms to help prevent it works as well. So,
That's great. So, from a cybersecurity perspective, right? So, do you work with external providers? Do you have an internal team that has to handle that? How does that work?
both. So we have some of the bigger firms. I won't, from a security perspective, won't name who they are, but we have some of the bigger providers to help us with security. In addition to having a few people on staff and our IT team that help handle that from a remediation perspective. We have multiple levels of security. We're constantly getting audited to make sure our practices and policies are up to date. And there's a constant training expectation as well to identify the latest patterns in fraud attempts as well. Because the people are the biggest risk of having something happen, and so I think the institution I'm at now does an awesome job on the training side as well to help thwart that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my next question actually
Yeah,
evolves around that, and you make a
sure.
great point that training people with all of the changes is so crucial. So, let me ask you from the people perspective, right? So talent acquisition in banking is also evolving because what used to be the technology, let's say a few 10, 20 years back, things have changed, right? And there are like constant challenges about threats, both at a cybersecurity level and even otherwise, right? And with emerging technologies like AI and everything coming into play, right? So which means that it's not just about financial knowledge but also technology driven skills that are becoming more and more important as well, right? So how do you go about hiring the right talent, and what qualities and expertise do you think will define the next generation of banking professionals?
Yeah, I think from a modern leadership perspective, having the IT team being the only people that know about IT is just not the way the future is going to be. Even right now, I think it's important for modern leaders to know about infrastructure, data, at least to the level. They don't have to be experts, but at least at the level to be able to be conversational with some of the service providers and your IT team to know how to implement, adapt, and deploy some of those technologies as well. And I'd say from a future perspective, I've always been someone where if one person can do it, other people can do it. So I think, as long as you have the right staff that's open and willing to learn, I think from a resilience perspective in the financial services industry, we've shown that we can adapt, and I'm sure it'll continue to be that way.
Okay, that's that's a very important point. Now, I want to switch the topic to something different, but also important, which is sustainability and ESG, environmental, social, and governance initiatives that are gaining momentum in the financial services, right? Uh, so, how do you see that playing out in the banking world, from sustainable investments as well as responsible banking perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it catches on more than it is catching on now. I think it's incumbent on every institution and organization. We all share the same earth, right? Without getting, super crazy like that, but we all share the same earth, and I think even from a customer experience perspective, a lot of the customers are asking questions about that, and so every institution should have some sort of policy that relates to that. Like for us, it's starting to, the initiative to go paperless in the different areas in the back office, right? And I think, we don't have the same resources as a large bank, but where we can, we are investing in that technology to get rid of the paper and really focus on that digital adoption.
That's great to hear. So let me ask you a question which is closer to what we do, and we typically like to learn from industry leaders like you, as you have mentioned, right? That you are going paperless and you are going more digital, right? So that also brings the challenge that with the digital transformation, when you now have a lot of content which is like unstructured, right, which has to be manually processed, right, and for smaller institutions it's even a bigger challenge because you have smaller teams to handle that, right? So, how do you see technologies like AI based systems, which basically does document processing and extracting intelligence or helping augment the team to at least do some of the heavy lifting so that people are freed up to do like more higher order things, right? So, how do you important and or how urgent do you think that technologies like that in the current banking world, right? And especially in context of smaller banks?
Yeah, I think it's huge. It's huge. I mean, just you come in and open an account at the branch, and you have all this paperwork. Banks have to keep copies of all that stuff. So instead of just keeping a file somewhere, what you have that's coming down the pike, archiving software that you just instantly, as soon as you click print for the customer, it automatically saves it out, and you don't even touch the paper. The paper's for the customer if they want it. But to be able to deploy that digitally, email it instead if they don't want the paper, it's small tweaks like that that I think small banks can kind of catch up to those efficiencies in working with their core providers.
That's great. So, Dennis, it has been a fascinating conversation with you. Thanks for sharing the insights around this because I think some of the points that you have made is very valuable for our listeners to understand what goes in the financial world and how does the challenges look for larger institutions versus smaller institutions because there are overlaps but they are also very different. So really appreciate that. So before we end the show, my last question for you is, personally, what are some of the technological advancements that you are excited about that is happening in the banking world, right? And it doesn't have to be only AI, but there is a lot that is evolving in this world. So what do you see would make the biggest impact in, let's say, the next 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah, fraud. I've always loved fraud, kind of that carryover from that audit side. I've loved fraud. Fraud is a big challenge, I think, for the financial institution. It gets back to that trust piece. And it's exciting to see some of the algorithms and results that you can kind of see from a debit card perspective, from a credit card perspective, and even from the traditional ACH check, some of these systems that people have put in place and the adoption that they're getting to help prevent customers from experiencing fraud. I'm super optimistic about where that's going, and hopefully in the next 5-10 years it'll be even more crazy than it is now. So I'm excited for the future of that. So I really like that fraud side.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I mean, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. And we look forward to having more conversations with you in the future as well.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for listening in today. Feel free to reach out to Dennis on his LinkedIn. Connect with him if you want, if you have more questions about this industry and want to learn more. And I look forward to having you back in the next episode where we talk to another industry leader and learn about their challenges and how technology is changing the market. So thank you everyone.